They wanted to be the biggest band in the world, and they knew they could do it.
Through struggles,
Nicky just could not keep a beat.
He wasn't a musician.
They had no food. They were just living off of whoever will help them out at the time.
and setbacks.
Bob Krasnow said Elektra is not really interested in selling music to people who live in the gutter.
They were just a joke.
Some people are just driven. Four rebellious rockers' defiant pursuit of superstardom.
Nikki Sixx had a plan for world domination.
They weren't going to give up until they got what they wanted. What they wanted was Hollywood by the balls.
Never before seen images, stories, and revelations from the people who know what really happened.
There's girls everywhere, wall-to-wall girls.
Because they lived it with them.
They'd come into the studio and they'd be doing drugs. We couldn't take 5 years to turn this into something, or this organism would destroy itself.
You just couldn't help but say to yourself that these guys are either going to fall flat on their face or they're going to go right to the top.
This is Driven Motley Crue.
Frank Ferrano was born December 11th, 1958.
We call him Nicky now. As a kid, we called him Frank, among other things. When Frank was born, his mother was 17.
She was beautiful. She was striking, and she was very charming. She really tried to do the right things, but as fate would have it, every time she turned around, she made a mistake with this, or made a mistake with that, or a misjudgment on people.
When Frank's father and mother split the sheets with each other, it caused so much hard feelings between them that Frank suffered for it.
My mom was dealing with quite a bit. We had hard times. It was the sole income. She didn't have anybody else to take care of us. And she was also very wild. She liked to party.
One time, his mother took off and went with a truck driver, and she had left him with some woman in Sparks, Nevada. She called his grandmother and I. We picked him up and brought him home with us. When his mom would leave him, he'd never talk about it, except Mom had to go someplace.
We lived in El Paso. We spent at least a year together there with my grandfather and my grandmother and my mom.
We had a hog ranch down in Texas. When Frank was a little boy, he had to fight his way through school. The big kids would grab him and take his money, and one time he loaded a lunchbox full of rock, and when the kid come up after him, Frank just hauled off and batted him with it, and no more problem from then on. We let him get independent for himself. It's the only thing I could do.
My mom and I moved to Seattle when I was probably about 3. Because of my mom's wildness, my grandparents felt that it was best if they took Frank and raised him, at least for a little while.
Frank was kind of brought up like a gypsy because I moved from job to job for a while. We had the kid with us down in Texas, New Mexico, Lake Tahoe, and Jerome, Idaho. It's a hard life on him.
He got sick of being told what to do.
Frank was having trouble in school a little bit, and it upset me.
I think a lot of Frank's attitude came from being kind of exported.
Frank come to the conclusion that small town was too small. He decided that he'd go back and live with his mother. So his grandmother sent him to Seattle.
Frank came to Roosevelt High School in 10th grade.
When I first met him, he was hitting on my girlfriend.
He was a Peter Frampton lookalike. He had a long shag haircut.
He was really hot. He had like the sandy brown skin and he was real tan, and he had these eyes that were just captivating.
He looked like a rocker kind of guy.
It was fairly obvious that we were the rock and rollers, and I think he really clicked on that.
We had long hair and we dressed pretty flashy.
We were really into a lot of glamour rock.
Alice Cooper, David Bowie.
We were the loudest, hardest rocking band in high school.
I invited him to the house after school to hear the band practice. We had a stage set up in my basement, and we would actually get all dressed up with the satin shirts, and we would walk out there under the lights like it was, the big concert.
As soon as he saw us play, light bulbs went off in his head.
Frank didn't play a note but he really had the drive.
He bugged Rick, show me how to play.
I started teaching him some things. Somehow or another, I gave him the impression that if he could just get a bass, he could be in the band. One day, Frank walks in a music store down in the University District with an empty guitar case.
And asked for an application. When the guy turned around and went to the back room, Frank very calmly just opened up the guitar case, sticks the guitar in there, closes the case, and then waits. Instead of running out the store, he just stands there. And this person goes back, gives him the application, he says, thanks, no problem.
He comes to the door, and he's all flushed, and he's breathing hard, and look what I got. And he opens it up, and I look at it, and I just can't believe what I'm looking at. And I just say, this is a guitar. This is not a bass.
Even though I was just the stupid drummer, I knew the difference between a Les Paul and a bass.
And the look on his face was just of disappointment and despair. What?
Frank wanted to be in the band, and desperate times call for desperate measures.
We began to find out that Frank was having a lot of trouble at home. I can remember a time when his mom was shouting obscenities behind him. Not real pleasant environment that he was coming from.
I know he was having fights with his mom quite a bit.
Frank seemed to think that his mom hated him.
He was in those teenage years, growing up and discovering himself. You could tell he was just kind of agitated a lot.
He started to do some drugs.
When Frank and I went out to drink and to party, it was to excess.
You were smoking dope or you were drinking MD-20.
There was a big blow up between him and my mom, and there was just no resolving it. He was not doing well in high school.
By the middle of 11th grade, Frank dropped out altogether.
It got really bad. My mom and him had a talk, and the next thing I know, he went to Idaho.
When Frank came from Seattle to Jerome, he was a different person. He had an axe to grind with the world at that time.
He was talking about what it was like to take acid. It was hard to connect with Frank.
Frank always said that I'm going to be a rock musician if it kills me.
Something inside was telling him to go for his dream.
Between that and partying, that's all he thought about.
He decided to leave.
He had his mind made up and went to Los Angeles to become a rock star.
What a glorious time it was in the late 70s when the Sunset Strip was like the gold rush.
There was just sex everywhere, and there was drugs everywhere.
Frank was living from hand to mouth and sleeping in cars or wherever he could.
We called him up and I'm like, hey, Frank, how the hell are you doing, man? What the hell's going on? And he stopped and he goes, Sam, I'm only going to tell you this once. Frank Farana is dead. I don't want to be called that. Don't call me that anymore. My name is Nikki Sixx now.
He was adamant. I am not Frank Farana. I am Nikki Sixx, and that's what you need to call me.
He wanted to really erase his past.
The name change was a big part of Frank's metamorphosis. He killed off Frank Farana and rebuilt himself from scratch.
Frank Farana, he couldn't steal a break. Nikki Sixx, that's altogether different.
The first time I ever saw Nikki, we were playing the Whiskey A Go-Go when I was in an all-girl band. You couldn't miss him walking through the door, this hair that just was huge.
He was already dressed for MTV before there was an MTV.
Nikki had the dream of being a rock star. It wasn't like he was driven to learn his instrument. It was a prop. You know, the only thing with that prop, you do have to play a little bit.
This guy didn't even know what a E chord was.
Nikki learned how to be a better musician from our drummer, Lori Bell. They used to practice together. She would just get so furious with him. She'd be slapping her legs really hard, and Nikki just could not keep a beat.
When I first met Nikki Sixx, I was a street kid living in Hollywood. There was just this chemistry. I liked him immediately. I said, let's you and me start a band. And he was really happy. Like, he hugged me and was just like, yeah, let's do it, man. And so that was it.
London was fronted by Nigel Benjamin, the former lead singer of the very last incarnation of Motley Crue. Nikki Sixx was the bass player and in many ways the architect of the whole London theme.
We were going to try to perpetuate the classic glitter rock of 74, 75, kind of glitzy, glam, ambisexual, whatever you want to call it. scene in Hollywood at that exact moment was almost permeated with punk rock. Those people wanted no part of it. London would play a sold-out weekend at the Starwood, and then we'd go down there to get paid on Sunday. Nicky had to walk through an entire crowd of wrathful punks, you know, who did not like the way he looked.
The crowd of people, they were laughing at him like, oh my God, take a look at these freaks.
And he got spit on like 100 times.
They were just a joke.
We'd play shows, and Nigel would come backstage and go, that guy sucks, he can't play, I want him out of the band.
Nicky was not a strong musician. Nicky was all over the place.
There was just a lot of turmoil within that group.
Nigel had an extremely huge ego. He goes, it's Nicky or me. And I said, no way, Nicky's not going anywhere. Nigel Benjamin quit the band. The magic was gone.
Nicky said, I want something bigger, I want to shock people. I want to get out there and I want to be known.
One day I'm sitting with Nicky, we're out in my car, and Nicky started crying. And I go, what's the matter? And he goes, this makes me sad to think about it. He was, hold on a second. He started crying because he was quitting the band, and I didn't know that, you know.
Nicky wanted to put together 3 other guys that he had handpicked to be in a star band.
Nicky Sixx was a rock and roll architect, out to build the ultimate heavy metal beast.
Nicky hooked up with Tommy Lee.
He knew Tommy from Sweet 19.
Tommy was very young at the time, I think still in high school.
Nicky definitely got the best drummer around at that time.
Tommy was born in Athens and October 3rd, 1962. Tommy was 2 when my mom brought him back to the United States.
Growing up, he was a great all-American kid.
Tommy's relationship with his parents was very good.
You could tell it was a tight-knit family and everybody supported everybody.
My parents were pretty Leave It to Beaver.
Tommy had a lot of energy. He was very hyperactive. He loved music.
Tommy was banging on the stuff in the kitchen. He was playing on the walls. My father bought him a drum set for Christmas from Sears. And the front was all psychedelic, and there was a light inside the kick drum that blinked on and off, and he just thought that was the coolest thing alive. I remember when Tommy first got into ballet and tap class. Tommy had to come with me to class. Instead of him just sitting and watching the whole time, my mom was like, while you're here, you might as well try it, right? So he kind of got into it. They used to call him the 2x4 because he was like really stiff, you know?
I remember one time coming over to his house and he's in a pair of tights. And I'm like, Tom, why are you wearing the tights?
If I was ever mad at him or something, I'd go right in the middle of the street and I'd just go, hey, Tommy, it's time for ballet!
He was kind of embarrassed about it. I met Tom at Royal Oak High School.
Tommy was a skinny little guy, long hair, and kind of tall and lanky.
It was tough for him because he wasn't quite cool yet. He didn't really know where he was fitting.
Tommy got hassled a lot just for looking different and being different and having different interests. You know, he didn't want to play football.
He really wanted people to like him, and if they didn't like him, he was kind of hurt and wanted to know why. You know, why don't they like me?
Tom was a quiet guy, but his personality, he would change when he would play the drums. I mean, you could see it.
He was in our high school band. Yeah, he was a band nerd.
Everything was music, music, music.
Tommy would play the drums 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If anything, we had to pry Tommy off the drums.
Tommy always wanted to start a band.
They made up the group US 101.
Basically, it was a cover band. They were playing Styx.
Stuff like Fog Hats.
Journey was real popular.
Once Tommy was getting more comfortable with himself, that's when he got really cute. The girls started really digging him.
This one girl would come over and she would be in the driveway or on the side of our house just screaming, Tommy, I want to have your baby.
Please come out, and throwing rocks at the windows, and it was pretty crazy. Tommy's mom was very lenient. His dad was a lot more strict.
His dad wasn't real supportive about what was going on. He thought he was more or less wasting his time.
They had conversations about his education and where he was going in life.
It got ugly once in a while.
My dad was always a military guy. He had been in the military for about 40 years. My dad was saying, well, you know, you can always go in the Army and play music. And my brother wanted nothing to do with it. That ended up being a pretty gnarly fight. My dad was pissed off and he said something about being a man, let's go outside. He took my brother in the backyard and they were fist fighting. Tommy left right then. He just left and, you know, didn't come back till 2, 3 in the morning, something like that.
Tommy always knew where he was going, but I don't think anyone else knew.
US 101 was falling apart.
There was some infighting.
At about this time, Tommy started dressing a little differently. He was stealing my makeup. He was taking my earrings. He was taking my shirts.
He was starting to play in a band called Sweet 19, starting to play some of the Hollywood clubs, starting to get into the stuff that he really wanted to do.
We had heard through the grapevine that Tommy had got together with Nicky, the guy from London.
Him and Tommy clicked immediately.
He got the call to play with Nicky. He left high school, he left the house, then he moved to Hollywood.
There's nothing you can do to stop him at that point.
I remember just flipping out because all of a sudden he was just gone.
Nicky had a vision of this band.
It was his concerted effort to put the ultimate rock band together.
He had found an amazing drummer.
Problem was trying to find a great guitarist.
His real name was Robert Anthony Deal.
He grew up in Garden Grove, California.
He didn't like the initials RAD, R-A-D.
He was always coming up with another name every week to be called instead of being called Bob Deal.
When he hit Mick Mars, you know, it just kind of came out and it stuck.
We had a band called White Horse back in the mid-'70s. Mick was a guitar player that followed our band around, and he was just dying to get in our group.
We were playing Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin. Mick would come around to where we would play, and he would just stand there and look at us.
He was introverted and shy.
Mick had 2 children by his first wife. He had to make money so he could support the kids.
He didn't have a dime to his name. His amp was blown up, his guitar had a broken neck, and the guy had 1 set of clothes.
But it didn't matter. I was immediately blown away by the way he played.
Let's turn out the lights. This guy's just got it.
He added a dimension to the band that we didn't have before.
We knew we were going to be famous. We were in a record deal, and our managers saw disco as the next big thing. We want you guys to put 3 disco songs on your album. Mick and I said, no, we're not doing that.
We were a ballsy rock and roll band, and we weren't going to settle for anything less than that. Things just kind of fell apart after that.
Mick and Kenny continued on for a few years in Vendetta. Pretty soon that band fizzled out, and Mick was back on the streets destitute.
I don't know how Mick survived. He hooked up with another gal. He had another baby.
All of his bills started piling up. He was starting this pattern of failure. And I think he just saw, hey, I'm never going to be able to get out of this if I don't change something.
Mick had put an ad in the recycler stating that he was a loud, rude, aggressive guitar player looking for same. And he got a phone call from Nicky Six.
Mick showed up and that was it.
Nicky and Tommy thought Mick had sort of an alien look, and that was appealing to them.
They started collaborating a little bit and held auditions for a singer.
Tommy goes, hey, I know this guy who sings great and he looks cool. His name's Vince.
Vince was born February 8th, 1961 in Inglewood, California. He was adorable. Chubby, short, little squatty legs.
My wife had him on the bed there, and I peered over to watch, and all of a sudden he just wee-weed all over my face. I learned not to be so inquisitive anymore.
Vince was very photogenic. One day they had this milk truck come around, and they saw him, they wanted to take his picture. I put little Buster Brown short pants on him and high-top shoes. And they took his picture, and he made the calendar.
He would be kind of shy in front of the immediate family.
But when you put him by himself in front of more people, then he was another person. Vince and his sister both took dancing lessons. They took tap, they took ballet, and he loved to dress up. He wore the little tights. Then as he got a little older, they wanted to take ice skating lessons.
We entered this competition. I was amazed of the jumps and twirls and stuff that he was doing.
He was the best figure skater. He was number one.
Vince must have been probably 12 or 13 when we moved to Glendora.
When I first worked with Vince in 8th grade, he was very raw talent. Vince wanted to be part of the popular group of kids that played the instruments with the choir.
He loved music.
He wanted to be a guitar player, but we already had some guitar players. Vince was doing the singing primarily. We did some stuff from the rock opera Tommy. It was really a great way to get attention, a great way to be liked.
Vince loved the attention the girls gave him.
Girls made him feel good, so Vince's direction was, gee, I need more of this.
I met Vince at Charter Oak High School. I was a big Van Halen fan at the time. I was looking to put something like that together.
Vince had the longest hair in the school. He kind of looked like a rock star already.
I thought he looked a little like Dave Roth. I asked Vince if he'd sang, and he said he had sang in a band.
He got into this band called Rock Candy.
We got together at a friend's house to play together. Vince was real timid and the voice was weak. We sang Hot Legs by Rod Stewart. I remember trying to coach him into putting a little more oomph behind it, and that's when I was pretty sure he hadn't sang in a band before.
Rock Candy was doing a lot of covers. Cheap Trick, some Eddie Money, Led Zeppelin.
As we played more and more things, Vince seemed to become more confident. His voice became stronger and bigger.
When Vince was on stage, he was a very different person. He would just lose himself.
He had so much charisma that he could really get an audience going.
The girls loved him. I couldn't believe this was my boy.
Vince switched from Charter Oak High School over to Royal Oak High School.
Vince and Tommy met through school.
Tommy played in the US 101 band, and he played like Beach Boy stuff. They were like Goody Two Shoes band. We were like a rock band.
Tommy looked up to Vince a lot. He introduced the Bad Girls to Tommy, and Tommy loved it.
Everybody thought Vince was just like the hottie.
Vince was respected because he was the ladies' man.
Vince's girlfriend was Tammy Jones.
They fell in love.
Eventually, they had a baby together.
Vince was 16 years old.
Having a baby at that young age, I think, added a lot of stress to Vince's life.
Vince started losing interest in school then.
His grades started sliding. It got to the point where he just didn't want to go to school anymore.
When Vince dropped out of school, we were very upset because he had so much potential.
He was spending more and more time just in his music.
Vince's mom and dad wanted him to have something to fall back on.
We were very disappointed. We wanted him to be a lawyer or a doctor.
I wanted him at least to get a high school diploma. I didn't want him to just be bouncing from one job to another.
Vince had a little temper. He wanted things done his way, not our way. Vince moved out of the house when he was 17. I was devastated. I wanted him to come home. How could he make it in the music field? He was just a boy from Glendora.
The more Rock Candy played, the bigger the crowds were getting. We played a lot of small clubs, and then we worked our way into Hollywood.
We played the Starwood. It's a whole different trip. It's definitely a next step up.
To us, that was, as big as it can ever get.
Rock Candy's playing, and Nicky shows up. I knew of Nicky from the band that he played in called London.
Tommy told Nicky about Vince being the singer of Rock Candy.
Nicky came and said, I found this new lead singer. It's this guy with this unusual voice. He's fronting a band called Rock Candy.
Vince said, there's this band that wants to pay me $150 a week to play with them.
Vince was pretty dedicated to our band at that time.
I go, $150? Buddy, anytime you can make money doing this thing, go do it.
He had the look, but his voice was a little suspect, so we decided we'd go with the look and we'll have to work with the voice as we go.
Nicky had the final cog in his vision in getting Vince Neil. Once Vince joined, something really clicked.
Vince was on his way to be a rock star, and that's what he wanted to be, and that was all there was to it.
When Tommy and Nikki and Vince and Mick finally hooked up, it just came together.
They seemed to have a good camaraderie and seemed to click pretty good.
My brother John was a roadie for Mick Mars, and John gave us a call saying that Mick had just gotten together with a new group and we should come down and see them. My husband wanted to get involved in the music business.
Alan Kaufman had already made money doing real estate.
He came down and took a look at him.
He met with the group and said, okay, I like what I see, let's go ahead and cut a deal.
Alan had a lot of money and started pumping the money into the band.
The idea was you needed to spend money to make the group look important, to make them look like they had already hit #1.
They had better clothes and better equipment.
Tommy told me that we're going to call the band Motley Crue, you know, with the umlauts. Well, I knew he didn't even know what umlauts were. It was all coming from Nikki.
You'd see Nikki and the other band members going around Hollywood plastering their posters on all the lampposts.
Motley started playing clubs right away.
The first show was at the Starwood.
There were a lot of people there that were probably already fans of London, and this was Nikki's new band. It was like, what's this going to be about?
When Motley Crue hit the stage, it was chaos.
It was big and it was loud, it was aggressive.
I just flipped out. That was their first show and just people went nuts. I was all proud, you know, I was all, yeah, that's my brother.
Things were a little rusty, but you could tell the sound was there, the look was there, the energy was there.
It wasn't like, oh my God, this is going to go straight to their move. They really were gelling. They were determined.
There was something so outstandingly different with Motley Crue. You just couldn't help but say to yourself that these guys are either going to fall flat on their face or they're going to go right to the top.
In early 1981 in LA, the new wave was probably the biggest scene going on.
It was mostly either dance music or punk rock music.
Bands like X and Motels.
There was a lot of the knack in the cars.
There was like a punk, skinny-tied, short-haired reality.
Motley's music was different.
Motley Crue just represented kind of the underdog because there wasn't a lot of metal.
They started playing around, and at first people were like, Motley, what? What is it?
The Crue's whole look was something that nobody in LA was doing.
It was kind of girly, kind of freaky.
When I saw the way they dressed, you know, I was startled. Vince had makeup on better than I could ever put it on. People were saying that he looked like a transvestite.
A lot of guys might have felt threatened by that.
Nicky didn't want to take no from nobody. If anybody gave any boy, he'd retaliate right back.
Nicky was fighting with some punk rockers out in front of the whiskey and got beat up kind of badly. He had a really gnarly black eye. But he thought that was cool. Motley Crue were definitely the street tough kids.
We arranged for an apartment for them.
Mr. Kaufman put him up in a sleazy apartment, and it was awful.
Motley Crue lived on Clark Street, just a half a block above the whiskey.
Tommy called me up. Oh, you gotta see, we got our first apartment, you know. So I said, well, all right, what number is it? He goes, don't worry, you'll find it.
The door was like coming off the hinges.
There was a mountain of beer cans outside.
There was one plant in the corner, it was dead. It was pretty destroyed.
The apartment was done.
Every time they did a show, there was an after party.
They'd announce on stage, hey, everybody, there's a party at the house tonight. Come on up the street.
Next thing you know, half of LA is showing up.
People just drinking.
There was girls everywhere, wall-to-wall girls.
Blonde, big little clothing. They all want Nikki Sixx.
They weren't wearing their own half naked in there. I hated it.
It was better than the Miss America beauty pageant or Hugh Hefner swimming pool.
I'd walk into rooms and just be astonished. I hadn't seen that kind of stuff in my life before.
I would hear all the reports about them getting wilder and crazier.
And then the cops had kicked down the door so many times that there was no more lock on the door.
Everything you do is success. Ooh, make
all 'cause you are the best.
The only way that Alan and I had to control what the guys did at all was through money.
Basically, the group was put on an allowance.
If you want money, you have to conduct yourself in a certain way.
He gave them $20 each a week to live on. They already needed $2 a week for hairspray.
They had no food. They were eating junk.
They were basically just living off of whoever will help them out at the time.
The money they did have, they would drink it, you know. They would party with it.
I brought a McDonald's. When I walked in, I had French fries, and they would split them up. They would count them. One for you, one for you, one for you. And I'm going, this is really sad. Do you guys want some bologna or something?
They did everything together except Mick.
Mick was older. He'd been doing this for a long time.
The guys used to rag on him for being the old man, but he had been there, done that so many times in the LA club scene, he wanted to get out of it.
He never had that teenage angst thing. It was always Tommy and Nikki and Vince, the terrible threesome. They hung out at the Rainbow until 2 o'clock every night. One time they were doing lines of coke on the table, and there were girls underneath the table, and I'm not going to venture to what they were doing exactly. They released the Too Fast for Love record on Leather Records, which was their own record company.
We self-produced the first album under Kaufman and Kaufman Productions.
What they had recorded at the time was really raw. It was just straightforward rock and roll.
Over the next year, the plan was to have them play as much as possible.
There was apparently some sort of demand for these freaks. They were a complete joke to Hollywood. But you had another population from the suburbs, and they are the ones that actually supported Motley Crue.
They sold out a weekend of the whiskey, and there was a line going up the street.
We were upstairs in the dressing room. Tommy looks out the window and he's like, oh my God, you gotta come see this. There was a line of people. I mean, out the parking lot and down the Sunset Strip.
I'm driving down Sunset Boulevard, and all of a sudden I see kids lined up down the block to get into a show, and I look up on the marquee and it's Motley Crue Sold Out. I'm like, I gotta see what this is about. For an hour and 20 minutes, the crowd just went berserk. And I decided from that moment, if everybody in this room would go this crazy for this band, this group is huge. I went to the next show and I met them and offered them a deal.
The new management team at Elektra had their own way of doing things and their own vision for the group.
Alan Kaufman was definitely not a record company guy and didn't have a clue on how the record industry worked.
They should have been playing in bigger places.
They weren't getting the big bucks that they were hoping to get. Motley Crue felt that Alan couldn't take them to the next level.
Motley Crue dropped us. We spent a great deal of money on them and ended up with nothing.
Kaufman and Kaufman were entry-level managers. They did the best they could, but Nicky had bigger ideas.
The band really wanted to get a strong manager behind them.
I was packaging an Aerosmith tour, and I got a call from Tom Zutaut.
Doug said, I'm going to open up a management company, and I'm going to have a partner who will be interested in helping break Motley Crue.
Ted told me about this psycho band. He said, oh, let's fly out and see what they look like.
We saw Motley Crue perform at the Santa Monica Civic Center on New Year's Eve of 1982, and I thought it was a phenomenal show.
They were getting heavily into the pyrotechnics.
These guys lit themselves on fire and all the craziest stuff you could possibly do. And
it was a three-ring circus.
It was pretty